You're listening to Feathers, a podcast of stories about God speaking and his people having just enough faith to believe him and obey. I hope these stories inspire you and encourage you to take flight in your own faith. I'm your host, Amy Bennett, and this is Season 2, Episode 8. Well, hey friends, and welcome back to Feathers today. We have Elisa Pulliam today on the episode. She is the founder of MoreToBe.com, which serves parents and teenagers to be more bright, more beautiful, and more like Jesus. She's also a life coach and mom of four, and you will hear lots more about them today. You'll also hear about her journey balancing motherhood and ministry and really being obedient along the way. Let's go ahead and jump right in. Here's my conversation with Lisa. Well, Lisa, welcome to Feathers today.
Hey, Amy. So glad to be here with you.
Oh, me too. So let's start out. I would love for you to introduce yourself and your family to us.
That'd be great. I'm one of 6 people in my family unit right now, and we are going in 100 different directions. My husband, Stephen, and I have just celebrated 19 years of marriage. Miracle.
Congratulations.
Miracle. And then we have an oldest, Leah, who's 16, just got her driving permit, which is a little frightening. She's eager, though. She's eager and teachable. And then we have Abby, who will be 14 in October, and Luke and Caitlin are, they just turned 10, so they are big-time 5th graders this year. And that makes up our family unit, plus a dog, Toby, our golden retriever.
Oh, yeah, you got to include the dog.
Oh, yes. Apparently, I post more pictures about him on Instagram than I do of my kids. I don't think that's true, but that's what they say.
But they make the best Instagram posts. They're so cute.
They do. And when I'm sitting home alone working and he's laying right next to me, I pause, I look, he's cute, I take a photo.
I totally get that. Yeah. Okay, so the whole driving thing makes me kind of nervous. You have to give me pointers. So my daughter turns 13. So we still have a couple more years, but I'm already thinking, like, just the other day she was asking, so where am I going to park my car when I get my car?
Well, we've told Leah that before she gets the car, she has to have a job. So she actually has a job, and now she has a motivation to stick with it. But I just laugh at her. We have a good time when we drive. We go up to a local university and practice in a parking lot, and her dad has been brave enough to take her on the road. I'm not there with her yet. She only just got it a couple weeks ago, so we're still new to this, and it's scary.
Yeah, I still have memories of, my parents teaching me to drive. Mm-hmm. My goodness, my dad had to do it, I think.
Yeah.
I might have made my mom a little bit too frightened.
Yeah, there's something about the temperaments. I think my husband's much better off at this sort of training ground than I am. We can talk about it and do a parking lot, but the minute she picks up a little speed, my hands start flying and I start panicking.
Well, my husband, I feel bad for my daughter. My husband's a state trooper.
Oh no.
So I'm like, poor kid's going to be taught by a state trooper. I don't know if that's an extra good thing or extra bad thing. We have yet to be seen.
That's interesting.
All right. Well, Lisa, let's get into your story today. We're going to talk about your obedience really in balancing motherhood and ministry, and just a long journey that you've been on. So I would love for you to take us back to the beginning of your story and kind of walk us through all those steps of obedience you've gone through.
Sure. I would love to share about this. It's something that I feel pretty passionate about because I'm on the other side of what I consider the kind of great mess. So, like I said, Stephen and I have been married 19 years, and our oldest is 16. So I've been in the trenches of motherhood for some time. And I was not, how do I say this? I did not grow up in a Christian home. The faith was not modeled for me. Scripture wasn't something that I knew how to apply, and I only became a Christian in college. And so when I entered into motherhood and into marriage, I was new to everything is what I felt like. And I came from a dysfunctional family. My husband came from trauma in his family. And so here's the two of us, these two kind of broken people trying to figure out how to be husband and wife and how to be mom and dad and how to do it, this motherhood thing. And so we had a lot of great ideas and tried to put those ideas into place. And one of those ideas was for me to be a stay-at-home mom. We really saw the value of the mom being available full-time for her kids and to support her husband that way. And yet, at the same time, I always thought that I was going to be like a CEO of a company. I am a worker bee. I have big ideas all the time. I am very creative. I don't even like to. It just happens. I get ideas, and I want to be able to carry those ideas out. But I am not a caregiver. I'm not nurturing. Now, my kids would say I'm doing an okay job, but I don't feel like I'm doing the job that I want to do often as a mom. And so those early years of diapers and Cheerios. I hate the smell of Cheerios. And
for real, me too.
I hate that smell. And, toddler toys that make noise and big colorful things that clutter up a house. It's not my thing. And I really had to work very hard to be very intentional about being invested as a mom. But what I ended up doing, I think by default, was kind of keeping something on the side all the time. And so for the early years of Leah's life, I had a graphic design business, and I was freelancing as a graphic designer, which was my college degree was in English writing and art, and with a concentration in graphic design and a little bit of a concentration in public relations too. Did internships. So I had all this kind of professional desire, but I was at home. And fortunately, computers were invented, and I was able to do a lot of that work from home. But as the years pressed on, and then I had Abby 2.5 years after Leah, and I'm trying to juggle caring for these two and meeting deadlines for clients who were paying me. And I'm the type of person where if you're going to pay me, I'm going to get it done ahead of time. I just have an overdeveloped sense of responsibility, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so I was on that track, right? I had these two little ones, this husband, this part-time business that sort of gave me too much identity, I think. And then get so excited that the girls are going to be in elementary school and preschool. I'm going to take a tennis class at the local tennis and fitness, continuing education thing. I'm loving my new life. And then we decided to have another baby, or I should say, we had a friend who said to me, "So when are you having your next?" And my husband was sitting there, and he said, "Well, I don't know." And I'm like, "You don't know?" I'm like, "We're done." I didn't think that he missed that memo. I thought we had talked about having a third child earlier and got a dog instead. So I thought we were done, but he didn't think we were done. But he didn't think it was definite to have more. So Stephen and I ended up in a big discussion that took hours and ended with, "Well, Lord, you're going to have to change his heart or his heart." And I went to bed pretty adamant that I wasn't the one who was going to change in the situation. Well, as the Lord would have it, he changed my heart dramatically within 1 month. And every reason I had for why I didn't want to have more children, totally eliminated. Absolutely, I want to go play tennis. I want to work on, my business. I want to have time for friends. I want to have a clean house. I've already have two. Whatever it was my reasons were totally eliminated. It's cheaper. What about college education? From practical to personal. And I turned to Stephen. I'm like, "All right, I'm ready. Let's have another one." And I remember saying to the Lord, "Okay, I'll have one more." And he decided two was in the cards. And
that's nice, Lisa.
It was really I have a good friend that said to me, "Well, that's because the Lord knew he wasn't going to get the fourth in if he didn't get them in at the same time."
That's cute.
So that year of being pregnant with the twins and the year that followed really was probably a turning point in my life, as dramatic as the point of my salvation, in that I came to the least of myself. When you have twins and you already have two other kids, you go from man to zone defense, and you can't handle it all. And here's a perfect example. We were in a boarding school at the time, and lunch would happen up in the dining hall. We were allowed as wives and faculty kids to go up and enjoy lunch. And for me, it was a huge social thing. Get to connect with my friends, eat lunch. The kids played after lunch. Well, here I was, mama of twins with a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old, And I could not carry both the babies into the dining room in their car seat at the same time. So I was stuck. And I spent a lot of time at home that year because I just literally couldn't get out of the house. I couldn't keep them clean long enough, and they'd stay in the same clothes for like 3 days on end, and only if it really smelled or was super dirty did they get changed. I had totally changed from being the mom whose kids had to have the matching outfits and the bows in the hair to as long as it's clean and you're happy, I'm happy.
Anything goes at that point.
And it was anything goes, but it was the best thing that could have happened to me because I became the least of me, and God was filling me in that weak place. But there was still this desire for more than motherhood. And I don't know if I'm speaking directly to somebody right now who's listening to this, but if you're in that place where you desire more than motherhood, I want to say to you, please don't feel guilty about that. Just give it to the Lord and ask Him to change the desires of your heart and to show you the balance rather than it being an either or. And so in the next, like the first, I guess it was within the first 3 months of Luke and Caitlin's life. It was New Year's Eve. They were about 6 months old at the time, and my friend from college started a blog back when it was blogger.com or blogger.blogspot, whatever it was, or in the early days. And she sent me a message and she goes, you should do this too. And I took the challenge. I thought, well, if Kate can do it, I can do it. And so
were you working still in your graphic design business at this time?
I was still juggling it. I was doing more big projects rather than small projects. And it was like, I couldn't even tell you what client I had at that season in my life. It was such a small part of it.
Okay.
And so I started a blog that night, New Year's Eve. And within the next 6 months, I came to realize that passion I had to write from the time I was a little girl and my 4 years of a writing degree finally had a purpose. I wanted to write for the Lord. I wanted to share His truths. I wanted to convey what He was teaching me. And in His mercy, I had these babies who slept really late, like till 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning. And I don't know how, I don't know why. I can't tell you how to reproduce that if you're a mom with little ones right now. But the girls would get off to school in the morning and the twins would sleep really late. And I would leave the dishes in the sink and I would go have my quiet time and I'd read my Bible and pray. And then whatever kind of bubbled over, I started writing about. And it grew and it grew. And initially I was sending out emails to my friends and family like, hey, I wrote something. Check this out. And their feedback encouraged me to continue on. So the long of the short of that is what started out as an overflow from the Lord within a couple of years became an idol. Because I appreciated the identity it gave me as a writer. I liked the feedback. I liked connecting with people when I was stuck at home because there was a sense of connecting. My first Facebook friends were not real life people. They were people who were other writers. And then the real world kind of got into Facebook, and I was like, hey, this is my space.
It's my space.
Yeah. So I remember a point in which I wanted to go to a writer's conference, and I was convinced it was the time to write that book I always wanted to write, which is really a joke. I didn't really have a book I always wanted to write. I didn't even know I wanted to write for less than a couple of years at that point. And my husband and I had a pretty heated discussion. I'll remember we were sitting on the couch and we were folding laundry and watching something on TV. And I was trying to make my case for why I should go to this conference. And he just kept saying the same thing over and over again. I just don't think this is God's timing yet. I don't think this is the right time for you to pursue something like this. And I don't like a no, never have, never will. And did not like a no from him, for sure. But boy, God was using His wisdom in Stephen to really protect our family. And it wasn't the right time. I had 2 or 3 year olds at that point. And there was so much work that needed to be done on my heart. I was dealing with anger issues that were unhealed, what would come out of my mouth and what I wanted to be were two different things, kind of like the exercise video of, how I think I look when I exercise.
Right.
Actually looking are two very different things, and how I said I wanted to be as a believer and as a follower of Christ and as a mom and a wife, and how I was actually functioning with the words coming out of my mouth were two different things.
Mm-hmm.
And fortunately, I heeded my husband's no and pursued God about why. And within the next couple of years, so this was about 6 years ago, I ended up going into counseling and finally facing my past and dealing with all the pain that was bottled up inside of me, all the unforgiveness and the bitterness, all the shame and the guilt from my childhood and from what I had done as a teen and as a young woman in college, and just received God's forgiveness and began walking in His truth. And that was where my life transitioned from what can I accomplish to how can I live today. But it's been a struggle ever since. The habit of what I produce being my identity is still something I struggle with. And the Lord keeps on putting the same mission on me that He's put on since that season in my life, which is, Lisa, you need to live for me first. You need to let me fill you up like an empty cup. I need to fill you up with my word. I need to fill you up with my spirit. I need to fill you up with spending time with you. And from the overflow of what I give you, I first give you a call to fill up your family, to speak life to them, to care for their practical needs, to love and to serve them, to put down whatever is competing with meeting their needs. And I, wrestled against that, but received it. And then the Lord gave me, I feel like as a father would sit with his daughter and kind of be like, this is what I need you to do, but trust me, I've got more. Mm-hmm. Wouldn't say what the more is.
Yeah, He gives us just what we need when we need it.
But between the countenance and the expression and the tone, that sense of there's a promise of more. And then in the weeks and months to follow, I kind of had this vision of, okay, He was going to expand the territories, but only when I stewarded what I was given well to begin with. And that was my family, and then it was my from beyond my family to community in which God planted me in, the people that I already had physical contact with, and then beyond. And within a couple of years, my blog went from a blog to another blog name to another blog name to what I used to call it extravagant grace, and that was where my idling was kind of happening, where I was making an idol of it, and I had to lay that down for an entire year. And in that year, I met with one friend who we just talked scripture basically to each other for an hour and a half of lunch and encouraged each other and prayed for each other. And as that year unfolded, it became clear that the ministry that was happening in real life, it was time for it to expand. And my husband's blessing was there. My kids were older. My older girls were part of the vision of More to Be, which is what we ended up naming it. It was More to Be, more bright, more beautiful, more like Jesus. And it was the overflow of what was happening in my real life working with teenage girls. And so everything that I had been writing and doing in real life then went online as a way not to grow me, but to share these resources that people had been asking me about. And yet, the idolatry piece was still nipping at me. And I think that anybody who does anything where there's feedback, that feedback can become a detriment. So whether it's a blogger with stats or a work environment where you're constantly earning points or earning sales, or a homeschooling situation in which you're in a co-op group and now your kids are kind of your measuring stick based on how well they're succeeding, I think the risk is that what we do becomes our identity rather than Christ being our identity. And even though I was walking faithfully in the stewarding of the ministry, there was still kind of like a heart awry in me. And I went to the Illum conference a number of years ago, More to Be was just growing. My coaching business was something that I had just started. I had just become trained as a coach. And I sat in on a workshop, publishing workshop, and listened to agents and publishers speak because I still was toying with this idea from years ago when my husband said, this isn't the right time. That thought was still, well, Lord, is it the right time now? And so I went to this workshop, met with an agent very briefly at the end, went up and talked with Bill Jensen and said, hey, I have this ministry. I have all these resources. Should I pursue curriculum publishing? And he said, go ahead and send me your information when you get home, and I'll look at it. Well, I came home to a hurricane. I live on the East Coast. And literally I walked in the door, and 3 hours later our power went out, and I was totally unprepared as a mom, as a wife, as somebody, just as a child of God living in the middle of a power outage for 10 days. And I was miserable and cranky and angry. My computer wasn't working. I couldn't have any contact with people. I couldn't do the work that I wanted to do. And the Lord used that as another wake-up call for me of, what's your motive here, girlfriend?
Yeah.
And so I came out of that hurricane season, and by January decided I am not going the publishing route, and sent Bill an email that said, thank you for being so kind to me, and I'm just not going to go down the road that I had suggested to you I might consider. And that was it. Never heard from him. Moved on. Had my priorities finally back in order. And in the spring of that year, had a moment with my husband and with the Lord of feeling like it was time to pursue traditional publishing, because what I had been creating, self-published, had a limited range of how far it could go, and that my reason for not pursuing traditional publishing at that point was fear of rejection.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I had this conversation with Stephen, he said, I think it's time. And I'm like, really? Like, I was hoping he would say, no, it's not time at that point.
Yeah. Finally, when you're settled, it's like, oh, okay, now go.
Now go. And so I said, okay, well, we'll look towards that in the fall. And we began praying and decided that we weren't going to move in that direction until after we got through the summer. Well, the next week I got an email from a person I didn't know that said, are you already represented? I didn't know what that jargon meant. Never heard that before. And I thought, I don't think so, was my reply. And then I put pieces together and realized William K. Jensen Agency is Bill Jensen. And the woman contacting me, Ruth Samsel, who is now my agent, had been given my name from Bill. And she looked at what I was doing at More to Be, and she has said, I would like to represent you. I think we have a book in the midst of what you're doing. And she pitched the idea to me, and I said, absolutely. Stephen and I were like thrilled. Was not the traditional publishing route that we thought we would go, but completely resonated with everything that I was doing. It was going to be a book for moms and teenage girls. That's my heart. That's my passion. It's totally what I want to do. And so, or I should say, like 1/4 of my heart and passion, because there's a lot that I want to do. And so we ended up going through the process. I wrote my first proposal in record-breaking time. Bill and Ruth both had a response like, you've never done this before? And I'm like, I've never done this before. They're like, it's like you've done this before. I'm like, well, technically, I'd been thinking and praying about it for 7 years, but I'd never actually done anything like that before. Well, we sat and we waited and convinced that this was going to be from God. And it was rejected a number of times from a number of publishers for good reasons and for what I considered not so good reasons. And it was out of my control. I could do nothing about it. I was obedient. I moved through this. I was in unity with my husband. So why?
Yeah. You finally got the green light, but then nothing happened.
And nothing. And it was a huge sacrifice of time.
Yes. Oh, my goodness.
Huge, because everything else stopped. The ministry stopped. My work stopped. I sat on my computer and wrote 40,000 words in this proposal for, a couple of weeks. And it was at a cost. And then that made me wonder, is this really the right time for all this? Because my kids are still not all grown up.
Right.
So I came through that rejection season by Christmas of that year we knew that that proposal was going nowhere. And in the spring, my agent came and heard me speak at a conference, and I was convinced that she was going to suggest the original book idea to be on mentoring. And instead, she came back to me with a totally different book idea. And at that point, I just cried. I'm being honest. I cried and cried and cried. I didn't want to go through the rejection process. I didn't want to go through the sacrifice of time. I didn't want to risk what it might cost my family. And I wasn't sure that this was absolutely what I should be doing. And so I leaned into my husband as much as I leaned into the Lord and said, what gives? What's your will? And Stephen said, as only he could say so wonderfully, Lisa, they're asking you to write the story of what God has done in your life. Why would you say no to this? And I said, oh, I didn't even think of it that way. Because it's the concept as they pitched it to me didn't seem like that. And so he's like, work this thing through before you say no. And that meant me kind of putting some words down and developing some concepts to see how I would roll with this thing. So, 2 years later, almost, it'll be, goodness, yeah, it's a year and a half now. That book idea was accepted. I got 2 offers from 2 different publishers, went with one that we thought was the best, and had to write a book in it was about 4.5 months. I had to write the book when you normally have 6 to 9 because of the time frame of when the publishers wanted to release it, and I have spent the last year working on this book project. And there have been days in which my family has felt like this is the greatest thing that ever happened, and there have been other days in which we're like, oh boy, can we do this another time? That's one question. And we've also looked at it, all of us, all 4 of my kids will have conversations at the dinner table with all of us. Wow, it is a really good thing that this didn't happen way back when.
Oh, wow. They already see that.
Oh, we all see it. We all see it. It is so abundantly clear. It's not only abundantly clear that I wasn't supposed to write a book when the twins were born, that year of life. I wasn't supposed to write it the 3 years after that when I had the great idea. I wasn't supposed to write it when the book proposal, the first one, went through. And going back and looking at that original book proposal, I'm glad that that wasn't my first book either. It's all in hindsight looking back.
So I'm just curious, as you look back at that time, and so you really felt like you were supposed to write that book, the first one that was rejected. So that was a lot of time and a sacrifice that you went through. So why do you think that, you didn't feel just led to skip that whole process and just wait till now to do it? Do you see what I'm saying?
Say that again. Yeah, clarify that.
Yeah, so why do you think that writing that first book was the right thing to do at that time? Knowing, the Lord leading you down that path, yet knowing it wasn't going to be published?
I think there were a couple of lessons that he wanted me to learn. To endure rejection was number one. And by doing so, in a very, very slight way, identifying with Christ, who was rejected.
Yeah. So sorry, let me say that again. Yeah. If we have somebody listening that might be going through a time of rejection, whether it be people or for a book or a project, what kind of lessons did you learn that you could share with some listeners?
The benefit of clinging to Christ. I think of the passage of Scripture where it says that Paul talks about God's grace and that His power, and that God's power is made perfect in our weakness. And when we're in a position of being rejected, it's an opportunity for a door to open to God's power and to see Him move in us and change our character, change our priorities, change our impact. There's so much that could come out of it. One thing that came out of that book rejection, actually, was that I had been in the trenches mentoring girls, and we were in a boarding school environment, and so I would go to the girls' dorms and just sit and talk with them and answer questions and connect with them. And it was within the weeks of one of the very most painful rejections. And one of the girls at the end of the night said, "Mrs. Pulliam, you should write a Bible study for us. You should write a book for us." And I'm like, well, I tried, but apparently my voice is too motherly. And she said to me, she goes, "Motherly? Why would we want any advice from anyone who's not a mother? You've been there. You know what this is like. We want your advice." And what that ended up doing was sending me back home with my tail between my legs and saying, "God, I'm sorry. I let the opinion of a publishing house affect the position of influence that you have put me in and stepping out to minister to these girls." Because remember, he had said to me years earlier, "Be my child, let me fill you up, and then serve your family from that overflow, and then serve this community from your overflow." And I was not focused on serving my community from that overflow because I was focusing more on the beyond. Mm-hmm. And what ended up happening was I decided that night, all right, I'm going to write them a Bible study. And I wrote those girls a Bible study within a weekend. And it's Journey to Freedom. That's on my website. And the amazing thing has been to watch that Bible study, which I have not marketed. I don't put any marketing effort into it. It's on the website. It's in the email that goes out to my subscribers. That's it. I put it on Pinterest occasionally. That is the number one resource used probably through our website, besides the free pieces that we can't tell how many of those are going out every day. But the number one paid resource is that one. And that resource is underwriting the cost of running the ministry, which is allowing me to not work the number of hours that I would have to work to fund it myself, so that I could be working on these other projects and serving in other ways that the Lord has enabled. And so, okay, Lord, there's Bible study. This is what I thought you wanted me to do, and he accomplished it just in a totally different way than I expected.
Mm-hmm. And don't you think, too, as I listen, that because that one was rejected, it makes you more grateful and you can see God's hand more?
Oh, yeah. Could see his hands more. And that Journey to Freedom Bible study is way better, written way more powerfully than the original book proposal. All those publishers that made that decision, I'm very, very grateful to them for having done that, because it made me a better writer.
I was going to say, and it was practice, too.
Oh,
I mean, it had to have been.
Yeah, it was great practice. It was also during the summer of waiting for those responses from publishers. We were on vacation for a week where there was hardly any Wi-Fi. I didn't really believe that the place had no Wi-Fi, but they really meant it when they said no Wi-Fi. And I can tell you that I spent that week not mentally present because I was so consumed with what the outcome would be. And Stephen and I, in the last days of that trip, said, we can't live like this. It can't be this way again. And moving into that next year, my priorities on work time, my boundaries. So, we said in the beginning, how do you balance ministry and motherhood and work and passions and all that goes into that. My priorities completely shifted and set us up for this book writing journey that I've been in the last year.
So really, and what I think we can share with listeners is sometimes the journey that we're in is really about a priority shifting more than what you're producing. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. God doesn't want us to create, worship the things we create. He wants us to worship him who's the creator. Mm-hmm. And he is creating in us and through us, whether that is in an artistic sense or if it's in a production sense. I mean, we're creating when we're taking care of our kids. We're figuring out schedules and we're meeting needs and we're planning meals and managing budgets. But when that thing that we're working on becomes more important than heeding his leading and living for him, we're going to have problems. And I think he will allow those things to be taken from us and to be shifted in order to shift our priorities back to what they should be.
Mm-hmm. Well, I've been studying John 15 and talking about pruning and discipline, and those things that you were doing were good things. But Jesus says that He will prune back even the good branches so that it would produce more fruit. And I see that kind of what maybe you were going through is that those were good things. You were writing, Christian books. It wasn't that it was a bad thing, but maybe it needed pruned a little bit more. You needed to be shifted a little bit more before other fruit could come out.
I think it's so interesting that you said that, because that verse is my theme verse for this year. My word is abide in Him. But, and I also write about this in my book that will be coming out in December. I share this story in detail, but I'll give it to the listeners now. Back when I laid down that blog for a year, that happened because I was out in the rose garden that we had not planted. The homeowners before us had planted it, and we were charged with caring for it in this house that we were living in. So I'm out in the rose garden in early fall morning, and I'm deadheading the rose bushes, and I'm weeding, and I am crying out to God. God, I don't even want to do this right now. I am not a gardener. I'm doing this because I have to do this, and I have other things I want to do. And what are you doing with me, Lord? My life is too full. I can't take it anymore. And I just kind of collapsed on the ground there, and I was just crying out to God. And He very quietly but clearly said, Lisa, your life is like this rose garden. There are all these bushes in your life, and they all have the potential to have great blooms on them. But if you do not let me prune back what you're doing, these bushes will not produce the fruit that you hope they will produce. They'll still exist. They may not die, but they're not going to be healthy. They're not going to be vibrant. They're not going to grow and produce the blooms that you want them to produce. And in that moment, I clearly knew He was asking me to lay down extravagant grace, which I was contributing writer in places. It was growing. My following was growing. I was at the front line of where all the big bloggers are now, and lost all that I had done. Because I had to start from scratch when I started all over, and I started in a new direction and with a different purpose. So that lesson lasted a couple years, because it was not only the loss of what had become my purpose and my identity, it was a clear reminder as I saw people grow and get bigger and bigger, where they have, 50,000 followers on Facebook, and my Facebook started and I had, 2. Like, whatever the measuring stick was, I knew that where my numbers were not where they could have been if I hadn't let God prune me. And yet He continually has asked me to just be obedient to doing the next thing, and not be doing it to compete or to get ahead or to find my identity in. And sometimes that takes a major cutting back, even of a good thing.
Yeah, it does. And it just reminds me that the branch that holds the fruit has to be strong enough to hold it.
Yes.
And I think that's, what I see. You have this book coming out, and it's a lot of work.
Yes.
It's a lot of work to put out a book, to market it, to speak, and to all that. And what I hear is, now that you have the character and the priorities to be able to sustain that.
I hope so. I'm not through it, right? So I'm still in the character shaping and the lessons being formed, and my family's walking this road very tenderly without any commitments of what comes in the future. We're just saying yes to God in the right now, and waiting to see what happens with it. Yes,
well, I'm very excited to see what happens. So I appreciate you sharing your story. And if people want to pick up this new book that was the fruit of all of this labor, what's the name of it? Where can we find it, and where can we find you online?
Sure. Okay. So the book is called Meet the New You, and it's a 21-day journey to help you embrace fresh attitudes and focused habits for real-life change. That's kind of the tagline, the subtitle on the book. It's really about life transformation by taking Romans 12:2 and 2 Corinthians 10:5 and mashing it together in life application form. So how can you be changed in your thinking so that you can be changed in your living? And the 21 days walks through the life coaching process as though I'm your real life coach, and enables you to answer some very tough questions, but very helpful questions to figure out what steps you need to make towards change. So obviously, you can't change in 21 days. This book took me 21 years of living out my faith before any of it could even be penned. And so it will take time, but this is kind of like your starting point, your inventory place to figure out what should you work on for the coming year or the coming months. So the book comes out December 15th, 2015. I feel like it's 2016 already. It'll be available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, the Christian booksellers that you can find online, and you can find out more about the book and about me at elisapulliam.com. So that's Elisa, Pulliam, Pulliam, as in Mary is what we say, .com is where you can find out more about the book.
All right. Well, I hope everybody does check that out. It sounds awesome. So thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me, Amy. I hope that what I've been able to share, it will be an encouragement to at least one woman, if nothing else, to just find some joy in the life that she's living right now and trusting God for the next moment.
All right. Thanks again.
Yep.
I hope you enjoyed that interview with Lisa. I think the big thing I'm taking away from Lisa's story is something we've heard before, but it's really worth repeating, and that is sometimes we have to lay good things down so God can do some work in us before he continues doing work through us. I know personally I felt that this year as I haven't been blogging regularly, and it's just been so worth it to see God move and change my heart. Also, I think about how she was asked to say yes and be obedient for her book when she really wanted to say no because she had counted the cost and really wasn't willing to pay it. It was just too much of a sacrifice. But I love that she sought good counsel and let God keep speaking to her so she could be obedient in that. So if you're maybe being a little resistant to what God is doing in your life, maybe he's asking you to say yes to something, or maybe he's asking you to walk away from something, even if it's good. I hope you're reminded and encouraged to follow God because he is so trustworthy, and you will be able to look back and see how he was at work for good. Remember, you can find the show notes over at featherspodcast.com, and we will see you next time on Feathers.